uniformity and procedural. So a couple more terms for you. Procedural. Now, procedural maps are this. If you look at a chair, it has leather on it maybe. That leather texture can go on for infinity until it comes to a stitch mark, and then it's not very procedural. Well, procedural is a little bit more than that. Procedural is also a texture that can be calculated by a program to formulate how to wrap to infinity. Okay? So, taking a texture and making it tileable isn't really procedural, but it's procedural-like in the fact that it's not being calculated by math. Okay, and that's really hard to kind of explain, but let me just kind of go back to the other term, uniformed. Okay, uniformed, if I look at this, I could say, wow, that's a nicely uniformed UV layout that you have, in the fact that this square is equal to this square, the shape, the size. Okay? What happens then is procedural textures lay quite nicely on objects like this. So if I go in here and choose a kind of procedural-like texture, you can see that it wraps quite nicely. But what you're also going to see in the next example is there is things that we have to worry about, like stretching, pulling, and those things. So what I'm going to do is make a T layout for this, just like I did the other one. Okay, and I'm going to mark that seam. Then I'm going to hit A, and then U unwrap. And let's look at it texture mode. Alright, well, the outside edges, not too bad. But look what happens when it meets this. It gets really jacked up. Okay, what's that look with a procedural type texture? Well, we now have pulling and stretching, pinching going on. Okay, and I can see that here. So that's the advantage of having the texture pattern. That checkered pattern really does tell all. It says to me that if I really wanted this to be more procedural, more uniformed, I would have to do something else to it, and that is more seams. So don't forget the third rule, and the third rule is we don't want to have a whole lot of seams. So technically, if I went in here and I baked this out, it'd be fine, but it would have this anomaly within it always. Oops. So what I'm going to do is switch over to solid mode and show you what seams that you need to make in order to make it more uniformed. Okay, so right there. Sorry, I have a Macism going on, where if you use a Mac and a PC, it's one of those things that you do one of those all the time because of the Windows key, and you're so used to hitting Command. So it'll go away here in a second. It always does. Okay, if I mark these seams here and then unwrap it, and then look at it in texture mode, look what happens now. So something happened in this area because it is very ugly. But I know that because of the checker pattern. It's telling me that. And it is because I missed this seam right here. So that looks a lot better. Now, the direction of them is pretty important sometimes, but it's not as important as the size of these. So if these squares are the same size as these squares, it becomes very uniform, but you can see that's not the case here. These squares are bigger than these squares. So let me kind of show you what that means back in texture land. Okay, the smaller those squares are, the higher amount of detail actually goes into them. So you can see here, this is more clear than this because this holds a higher resolution than this. So that's why we want to take advantage of as much of this space as possible so everything looks clear. Okay. And in order to fix that, I would have to scale this one, and this one. Okay. And how I'm highlighting the entire shell, I have this option on. I'm just looking for something here. Okay, there's a thing called average island scale. Okay, if I hit A, that will help. Now you can see that the resolution stands true, and if I go back over to the UVs, you can see that all the actual squares are the same. So that's a way of fixing it automatically, or you could scale each one of these. Now, being said, now it goes off the 0 to 1, which is bad. So there's also a little thing that says pack islands. That will repack them back onto the 0 and 1, and now I have the best of both worlds. I have averaged islands, and then I have now packed islands. They all fit on the 0 to 1. So that's what I'm talking about. See, if I'm talking to a normal person and using these terms, they're not going to understand it. But as time goes on, using these terms over and over, you're going to be able to understand me without being inside Blender looking at something. So these are islands. They're also called UV shells. You can pack them, which means just laying them out to the 0 to 1, because this is 0 to 1, and they are now uniformed because they are all the same size as far as the squares go. And now procedural textures can fit on top of them and wrap quite nicely. Alright, now that we've seen that, let's go on to the next video.